Uh, we have successfully reached the final day of our 5-day online FDP on innovation and acquisition of IPR, jointly organized by the Atel Academy and IUC IPRS. So today's first session for the day is on enforcement of IPRs by Ms. Vindhya S. Mani, joint partner at Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan. Now I invite Smriti and Pradeep, second semester LLM IPR PhD, to introduce a resource person for the day. Smriti?
Yes, thank you, Darshana. Good morning, everyone. So, as already mentioned by Darshana, for the joint session, for the first session of this day, we are lucky to host Advocate Vindhya S. Mani as a resource person to deliver a lecture on the enforcement of IPRs. Ms. Vindhya, she's a joint partner in Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan Associates. She took her BSc honors in LLM, LB from University of Delhi. Vindhya is a joint partner in Technology Law Division of the firm. She is a registered advocate with Delhi Bar Council with more than 7 years of experience. She is primarily involved in IP litigation matters before the Trademark Office, Patent Office, PVP Registry, High Court, and the Supreme Court. She also advises clients on IP and allied matters. She's actively she actively engages in environmental matter litigations. She's engaged in conducting regulatory audits, advisory work and litigation under the Biodiversity Act 2002. Prior to joining the firm, she did the Masters in Law at Oxford University with focus on IPR law. We are fortunate and privileged to have you with us today here, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Smriti. Thank you, Darshana. Thank you, Dr. Asha. Good morning to one and all. Firstly, I'd like to thank IUC IPRS, QSAT for organizing this 5-day online FDP and for inviting me to be a part of one of the sessions on specifically on enforcement of IP rights. If you can just give me a few minutes, I'll just share my screen. I've prepared a short presentation. Is everyone able to hear me clearly and see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, but it's not in the presentation mode.
Yeah. Is this better?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the topic for today's discussion is enforcement of IP rights in India. Now, through the course of this online FDP, you have till date come to, over the course of the last 4 days, seen all the different kinds of IP rights. Of course, you have heard my esteemed colleague, Mr. T. Srinivasan, talk in depth on the patent protection as well. Now, as you all know, there are different kinds of IP rights. There is the Patents Act, there is copyright, there is trademarks, there is design, there is plant varieties, there is semiconductor and circuit layout. And each of these rights are governed by specific statutes. Of course, it won't be possible for me to give you an overview of all of these rights. Therefore, I have chosen to focus today on the enforcement of patent rights, but I will also attempt to give you an overview of the enforcement of trademarks and designs as well. Just to give you a sense of how enforcement of IP rights is undertaken in India, what are the procedures that are followed before the courts, and what are the legal principles that are adhered to in enforcement of these IP rights. Now, one more rider that I'd like to mention here is that we are looking at civil enforcement today. Of course, most of you must be aware, at least the law students in this gathering will be aware that there are criminal enforcement, criminal remedies under specifically the Copyright Act and the Trademarks Act. However, we'll be looking at that because they are restricted to specific circumstances. And of course, as you all know, the criminal remedies in our country is governed by the Criminal Procedure Code and the IPC. So they're more procedural in aspect. So today we'll be focusing more on the civil enforcement. Having said that, let me just set the scope for today's discussion. So firstly, I'll be giving you a very broad framework of the IP enforcement in India, focusing on designs, trademarks, giving you an overview, of course, an in-depth study on the patent enforcement. We'll also be looking at strategic considerations that an IP holder must look into while enforcing their IP in India. Thirdly, we look at in-depth what are the provisions that govern the patent enforcement, what are the procedures, what are the legal principles. And finally, I think just to set the context and to give you a practical overview of how patent enforcement is conducted in this country, we will look at one specific case study. Now, this case study, I'm sure most of you would have read in the news or come across. It is the case of AstraZeneca versus many generics, whereby it is one of the landmark cases in our country, whereby we are discussing the enforcement of pharma patents, specifically in the context of chemical compounds, marker structure. What are the issues surrounding that, and what happened in this case? Now, this case is going to be landmark because there's been one order, there's been a couple of orders by the single judge sitting singly before the Delhi High Court. There was an appeal to the division bench, which is a 2-judge bench. And then finally, we expect this matter to go right up to the Supreme Court. Now, I will try and keep the legal jargon to a minimum, but please pardon me. It's a matter of habit, that legal jargon has slipped into a conversation as well. Please feel free to clarify at the end of the presentation any doubts or, anything that I said that wasn't clear enough. So first, coming on to the framework of IP enforcement. Now, how can you enforce your IP? You have a registered IP, be it a trademark, be it a design, be it a patent. There are 2 broad ways in which you can enforce it. 1, before a court of law, and 2, at the border. Now, the border enforcement is extremely crucial, especially in the case of trademarks and designs when infringing products are being imported to the country. So these are the 2 broad avenues available to an IP holder to enforce their IP. Now, similarly, you may also want to get law. I'd request all participants to keep their mics on mute.
Please mute yourself.
Thank you. So secondly, one aspect is of enforcing your IP. The second aspect is when you want to get an IP revoked or you want to cancel an IP, whether be it for business reasons, whether be it for public interest reasons, to maintain purity of the register. That can be done at the following avenues. So 1, you can do that before the patent or the trademark office, or the patent office also has the design office. So you can either do it at a pre-grant stage, that is prior to the grant of the IP, or you can do it at a post-grant stage. Now, we have a pre-grant opposition and post-grant opposition for patents. We have what we call a rectification proceedings for trademarks, and we have a cancellation proceeding for designs. Now, similarly, we can also avail this remedy before the High Court. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware that we earlier had the Intellectual Property Appellate Board in our country, which was sort of a tribunal that was created to reduce the burden of the high courts and the Supreme Court, so that a specialized tribunal where you would have a judge as well as an expert member adjudicating IP disputes. However, in April 2021, through an ordinance, the IPAB has been abolished, and that jurisdiction now rests with the respective high courts. So in this regard, one important development that I'd like to share with you is that India is, at least the Delhi High Court has taken this challenge head on and has constituted an IP division within the Delhi High Court. Now, this is in tune with what we have in many other jurisdictions, such as the UK, where we have specific IP courts. Now, here we'll have judges who are either experienced IP lawyers or who are judges who've been, adjudicating IP matters for a very long time. So they're more attuned to IP laws. They have expert knowledge. Some of them could also have science backgrounds for adjudicating patent matters. So this is a step forward, and this will considerably improve the kind of decisions that we have, and in also increase the speed with which the matters are disposed of. And we expect that all other high courts, whether it is the Madras High Court, the Calcutta High Court, Bombay High Court, all other high courts will follow suit and will be creating separate IP divisions. Now, one of the major points of an IP enforcement is to decide the jurisdiction. Now, where should you file, a suit, a civil suit, when someone is infringing your IP? Now, almost all the IP statutes, you cannot file an IP enforcement suit, a civil suit, at any court inferior to a district court. So it can either be a district court above. Now, certain high courts, just to give you a bit of, for the non-legal persons here, we have only certain high courts that have original jurisdiction, which is the High Court of Madras, Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Himachal Pradesh. These are the only high courts which have original. Therefore, you can directly approach the high court in a civil matter. All other, for instance, Kerala and all other states, you cannot directly approach the high court. Only in appeal you can approach the high court. So that is the difference. So you can either file an IP enforcement civil suit before a district court or before a high court. Now, how do you decide which court to approach? That is a very, very important question. And most IP suits have this as the preliminary point of adjudication, is whether the suit has been filed before the right forum. So this is what we call a jurisdictional challenge, when you challenge someone for having filed the case before a wrong court. So this is predominantly raised in most IP matters. So generally, as per CPC, so now all civil proceedings are governed by the Civil Procedure Code. Now, as per CPC, we have the places where you can sue is where the defendant resides. Now, what do I mean by defendant? Is the person who is infringing. The person who institutes a suit is called as a plaintiff. So where the defendant resides or carries on his business, or where the cause of action wholly arises or partly arises. So therefore, one is where your alleged infringer is residing, carrying on business, or where the cause of action. Now, it can be at the same place or it can be at a different place. For instance, just to give you an example, I have a trademark and Vindhya is the trademark, and I'm residing and carrying on my business in Delhi. I suddenly find in Cochin, there's one ex-person who tries to infringe my trademark, has started a business under my name. Now, where can I sue? So I can either sue him in Kerala, where he is residing, in Cochin, where he's residing, carrying on business, or I can also sue him in Madras. Say, for instance, he has a distributor in Chennai where he's selling all his products under my name. So the cause of action arises in Chennai as well. So I can sue him in Chennai. Now, this is what the CPC provides. Additionally, in the case of trademarks and in the case of copyright also, just in these two cases, not in the case of patents, not in the case of designs, we have an additional forum, because these are the kind of trademark and copyright, you have the rampant infringement. So here the legislation decided, the parliament decided that we need to have an additional forum. The additional forum is to sue at the place where I, the plaintiff, reside and carry on business. So I can now sue this person who is selling the goods in Chennai, who is from Cochin. I can sue this person in Delhi. And because I'm residing in Delhi, I don't have to travel to Chennai or to travel to Cochin, spend my resources. I can sue him in Delhi. So this is what broadly is the matter of jurisdiction. Now, there are a lot of issues in these. What happens when I have one registered office in Delhi? I have a branch office, say in Jharkhand. Where do I sue there? So there are a lot of issues, and there have been a lot of judicial precedents in this regard. But this is broadly the issue of jurisdiction when you file a suit for civil infringement of your IPR. Now, what are the reliefs that you will get in a trademark and design? We'll first look at trademark and design and then move on to patents. What are the reliefs that you can get when you file a suit? The reliefs that you can get mainly are damages. You can get account of profit. So basically, how much have you suffered? How many goods has the infringing product? For instance, this person in Cochin sells goods worth of 2 crores under my trademark. I can get that recovered. I can get damages. I can get whatever business I have lost. I can also get an injunction, which is very, very important in a trademark or design, is to stop the other person from selling goods under my mark or under my design, so that to stop confusion among the public. Now, if they get to know that this is Vindhya selling in Cochin when I don't have any business down south, I only have business in Delhi. So basically, the intention in civil infringement actions is not so much to recover damages and account of profits, because that happens post-trial. The major action or the major relief that one seeks in a design infringement or in a trademark infringement is to injunct or stop the other person. Now, if I have to wait for a very long trial, and as you know, in our country, trials can take forever. If I have to wait for the entire trial for that person to stop working, it's going to affect my business. In the interim, what happens? And therefore, we have what is called as an interim injunction, an interim relief. Now, this I can get on the very day I file my suit. On the very day that I filed my suit and the matter is listed before the court for hearing, on that very day, if I can convince the court that I have a strong case, we look at the requirements for an interim injunction. On that very day, the court can say, listen, Mr. Person in Cochin, you stop using the mark, you cannot use Vindhya's mark until the matter is tried and finally adjudicated. So I get what is called as an interim relief, which protects my business. Now, this is the most important relief that we are seeing in all IP matters, whether it's patents, whether it's copyright, trademarks, or designs. Of course, there are other reliefs such as seizure of goods. Now, how is seizure done? For instance, what the court upon sorry, am I on mute? Can you hear me?
Sorry, ma'am, it's my mistake. Sorry.
Okay, all right, no problem. Okay,
you're audible.
So there are. Okay, thank you. So there are other reliefs such as seizure of goods. Now, how does that happen? So what happens is I file an application to the court to appoint, when I file my suit for infringement, I file an application before the court to constitute a local commissioner. Now, what this local commissioner is usually an advocate before the court who appears before the court regularly. The advocate is then sent. So this local commissioner is appointed. This local commissioner goes to Cochin, where this person is selling my goods. He will go and seize all infringing goods. He will collect all the goods. So immediate action can be taken. Police protection is afforded wherever there is the need felt for. Police usually accompany such raids, as we can call it, and those infringing goods are seized, and then they are sealed and kept in at least in Delhi parlance, we call it supardari, which is held under security by the court or by the local commissioner on behalf of the court. So these are the kind of reliefs that we have for trademarks. Now for designs as well, similar reliefs are there, but design infringement under the Designs Act, there is also a monetary ceiling that the Act provides. Now, this provision has not yet been tested. Generally, plaintiffs go, when filing a suit, they go for damages, they go for permanent injunction. They don't want to use the particular ceiling amount, which is about 50,000 given, 50,000 and 25,000 given under the Act. They don't go for that. So those kind of specific provisions are also there under the Designs Act. Next, coming on to certain additional considerations under the Designs Act. Now, here I'd like to give you an example where we represented a client who was before the Delhi High Court, who was sued by Crocs. Now, you all know Crocs for their famous footwear, what they called as an anti-fashion statement for being ugly yet fashionable. I won't comment on whether it's ugly or fashionable, but having said that, they sued our client for having infringed the design. So they had a design registration on the design of the famous Crocs shoe. Now, in this case, what had happened was they sued us under the Designs Act for design infringement, and we challenged the design. So when you defend in an infringement suit, there is two ways of defending it. One, you say, I'm not infringing. What I'm selling is completely different. It's not infringing your design. It's not infringing your trademark. It's not infringing your patent. What I'm doing is completely different. Therefore, I should not be held liable. That is one way of defending your infringement suit. The second way of defending your infringement suit is what we call as a counterclaim, where you challenge the validity of the IPR. So whether it's a patent, whether it's a trademark, whether it's a design, you challenge the very validity. You say that this design should not have been granted in the first place. And that is exactly what we did. So we challenged Crocs' design. We said that this design cannot be registered. So we moved a separate cancellation, the one that we saw previously before the design office. And we got the design cancelled. Now, what was the basis for us to get the design cancelled? We proved that the design that Crocs has is not something new or original, and that it has been prior published. That was that it has been published before the priority date of the design. So the design's priority date was about 2004. We were able to show evidence that prior to 2004, Crocs themselves had published the design in public domain, and therefore the design was invalid. Now, there the matter should have ended. But curiously, Crocs gets back to our client. He sues our client now for passing off. Now we'll look at what passing off is in the next few slides, but just to give you an overview, a passing off is a law remedy. It's not a statutory remedy. Now all of these that we've seen, design, trademarks, patents, they're all provided under the statute. Now passing off is not a statutory remedy, it's a common law remedy. Now as the name suggests, you are passing off your goods as that of another. Now today, if I start selling, Mercedes t-shirts, or, I just try and take somebody else's brand, even, a well-known brand, just to show an association, just to confuse the public, just to misrepresent to the public, that is an action of passing off. Now, so here what Crocs curiously does is they lose their design infringement. They lose that against my client. They come after me and they say, now I'm suing you because you're passing off my design. My client is selling shoes, which looks very similar to my shoe, which I'm using as a trademark, and therefore is passing off. Now to this, again, they lost before the single judge. The matter is now currently in appeal before the division bench. They lost it because the court held that you cannot claim the very same design as that trademark as well. You can, because trademark, as you all know, has shape as well. You can claim a shape of a good as a trademark. But here the court draws a distinction. This is a very important ruling, and this is going to be litigated more and more because there are going to be a lot of these kind of shapes which can be a design as well and which can be a trademark. So here we are seeing a sort of overlap between two statutes. But in our case, the single judge of the Delhi High Court, Justice Endlaw, clearly laid down that if the same design, so whatever you've tried to protect under the Designs Act, just because you got that invalidated, you're trying to protect the very same design under the trademark, that is not going to be possible and claiming an action of passing off. You have to something more. Say, for instance, they had some additional packaging feature of the goods. Say, for instance, like you have Chanel bags, which come in very distinct packaging, or you have any other luxury brands, which the brand has a distinct, the product has a distinct shape, but their packaging also has a very distinct and unique shape. Say you have something like that, then you can claim for passing off, but not the very same shoe, which you're also claiming under Design Act, and now you're saying passing off under the Trademarks Act. So this is a very important aspect of designs and trademarks. Now, also this judgment that I'm mentioning here is this was also in contention, whether you can institute a suit for design infringement under the Act as well as design passing off. Now, there were a lot of judicial precedents, both at the Delhi High Court as well as the Bombay High Court. Finally, a special bench of 5 judges, usually 5 judges don't sit together in any high court. It's only specifically constituted. A special bench sat and they decided that yes, you can file a composite suit for both design infringement and design passing off. Similar to patents, if there's a counterclaim for invalidity, say for instance, a design suit is filed before a district court, the moment I as a defendant file a claim for invalidity of the design, the matter shall be transferred to the High Court. So automatic matter goes transferred to the High Court, irrespective of the stage in which it was before the district court. Now coming on to the important part that we mentioned about interim injunction. Now, on what criteria does the court decide on the very first day or in the very first few hearings to award an interim injunction? Now, there are 3 tests. This is what we call as a classical trinity, which is whether the plaintiff, again, the plaintiff is the person who filed the suit, has a prima facie case. Now, a prima facie case is on the first day, of course, the judge does not have the benefit of a trial. He only has what is there on record. Based on the record, the judge has to come to a conclusion whether the plaintiff has been able to show a prima facie case of infringement. That is, on the face of it, is there enough to show that the defendant is infringing? So what happens in a trademark? They compare the marks. In a design, they compare the designs. In a patent, they see the infringing product. For instance, if you have a product claim, they see if the product is, of the same composition. In cases of compounds and in cases of other products, they see if the composition is the same or the components are the same. So those kind of considerations go into when you decide whether the plaintiff has established a prima facie case. The next is whether the balance of convenience is in the favor of plaintiff. Now here they weigh the options. Now they weigh the options as to if an interim injunction is given, will the plaintiff's rights be protected in comparison to the defendant's rights? Whose rights need to be protected? For instance, in the case of a trademark, this is going to be very easy because if the mark are going to be very similar, the court will come to a conclusion that the plaintiff is losing business. Now, if Vindhya's mark is being used down south without her knowledge, she is going to lose business. People in the south are going to associate her. If the person in Cochin is selling an inferior product, she is going to take a hit, right? Her reputation is going to take a hit. Someone is going to write a negative blog on social media and she is going to take a hit. So those kind of considerations the court sees and they weigh the rights of the plaintiff and the defendant. Finally, the final criteria that the court looks at is, will the plaintiff suffer irreparable injury? Now you'll see 2 and 3 is overlapping. There are going to be considerations that are overlapping. Here again, the court will see how much of an injury is the plaintiff going to be caused if I don't injunct, if I don't stop this defendant from infringing the IP. So these are the kind of questions that the court will decide when adjudicating an interim injunction in the first few hearings or in fact on the very first day. Now, coming back to passing off, I just wanted to highlight what are the considerations in a passing off suit. Now, passing off, like I said, is a common law remedy, but there is specific recognition under the Trademarks Act. Section 27(2) of the Trademarks Act specifically mentions that a passing off action can be filed. Now, why is passing off important is because there are many of us in many businesses in this country who don't know about trademarks. They've been using a mark, whether it's their family name, their father's name, their surname. They've been using it in business. They've set up huge empires. They've flourished, but they've never registered a mark. So is it just because they've not registered a mark? Are they remediless if someone starts using their brand? Are they remediless? No, this is where passing off comes for them. They don't need a registered mark. They can sue. They can say that I am the prior user. So for passing off, you need to establish that you're the prior user. You were the first one in the market and that somebody else is trying to pass off or to show that they are associated with you and therefore selling the goods under their mark. So in this case, what are the conditions that you need to make out in order to establish a case of passing off? The plaintiff has to establish a goodwill or reputation. And they have to show that the prior user of the mark. They have to show that the defendant's activities amount to misrepresentation. They have to show that the public is being confused, that the public is, that I am getting, for instance, how will you show this by evidence? Say for instance, somebody buys this product in Madras and they send me a complaint letter that your product is faulty. So this is clearly causing a misrepresentation. This is how I will show before a court that the defendant's activities are amounting to misrepresentation. And thirdly, you have to show that this misrepresentation has caused a damage to my goodwill or has a potential to cause. So say, for instance, a negative blog, this is definitely going to impact my goodwill. So these are the kind of requirements that one will have to establish to succeed in a passing off suit. In the first slide, I told you about IPR border enforcement. Now, this is very important. As we will see, I'll show you some statistics as to how this border enforcement plays out in India. So this border enforcement, these are by way of IPR Imported Goods Rules 2007. These have been issued under the Customs Act. Now, here what ideally happens is if I have a trademark, I can register that under these rules with the Customs Authority. And I have to, of course, pay some security, some bond. There are some various conditions that I have to fulfill. I have to show them proof of my registration, of my IP registration. So I do that. And then whenever there is an import, the Customs Authority sees, okay, this good is infringing Vindhya's mark. Let me stop it here. So they will stop. They will stop the clearance of the goods. They will invite me for examination. I will examine the goods. A hearing will be given, and then the Customs Authority takes a decision, of course, which is appealable to further authorities under the tribunals. But this is a very important action because I can't be monitoring everywhere. I can't be everywhere monitoring what infringing goods are coming into the country. One important change in this was that patents are not part of this. Earlier they were part of these rules, but owing to some litigation, which in fact our firm was part of, where we had argued before the court that in all cases it may not be possible for a customs authority to adjudicate whether a product is infringing a patent. Now, patent happens to be very technical, unlike trademarks or designs, which any common person can see. It's all about looking at it and deciding whether it's infringing or not. But patents can be highly technical. And therefore, there were a lot of litigation before the Delhi High Court. There were writs being filed against this. And then the government decided that it was right to exclude patents. So patents is entirely with the domain of the Patent Office as well as the High Court, the courts, and not with the Customs Authority. So just to give you a sense of the steps. So these are the steps. I won't go into specifics, just to give you, first you register, then there is suspension, then you submit a bond. Now this bond is very important because if the goods of any other importer, genuine importer, are held up and his business is lost, so that can be compensated by what I give as bond, and which is of course 110% of the declared value, and security is about 25% of the bond value. And then you have the hearing before the customs. Now, this I wanted to give you a sense of how this enforcement. So you can see in the last 3 years how many cases, and you can see the value of those seizure. So therefore, this avenue is extremely important for IP holders to, especially in the case of trademarks, designs, copyright, to get your IP registered with the customs and to ensure that at the border the infringing activity is stopped. And this will obviously be cheaper, more cost effective and time effective, rather than going to courts every time to get an injunction order for each specific consignment. So this will be like one-time registration done for, multiple infringing consignments that can come into the country. Now, looking at what are the strategic considerations that an IP holder must look at before enforcing or at the time of enforcing. Now, it's very important for an IP holder to have a market survey, to keep vigil. You can either do this by engaging law firms, you can professionals, consultants for these. There are people who do this on a regular basis. You can either do that, or you can do that yourself by having market surveys done, by keeping, watches on the trademark journals. For instance, on trademark, you can keep a watch on the trademark journal. You can keep a watch on the designs journal, patent journal. You can engage third-party investigators. We commonly do, for big brands, we commonly engage in third-party investigators. You can even do trap purchases. Now, trap purchases are very important when you file a suit for trademark infringement or design infringement, is because you purchase the infringing brand, you get to know the supply chain, and then you can tell the court that this is how established and how rampant the infringing activity is. Now, in the case of patents, of course, you will need lab tests. You will need to confirm that the patented product is infringing your patent claims. So you'll need to do all of those. And in the case of pharma, of course, one of the major avenues for monitoring infringement is by filing RTIs. By filing RTIs and to keep a watch on the drug controller authorities' websites, where you can see what drugs are being, because any drug to be manufactured, whether you're the original inventor or you're a generic company, you need to have the drug regulators authorities approval. So the moment you know that a generic company is getting an approval for your drug, you know that he's going to launch, and you can file. So important thing is you can also file a suit for infringement before the infringement has happened. This is a very important point, because we all think that only when the infringement happens I can sue a person, but that's not true. I can sue a person. Say for instance, I am a drug company, I've invented a drug and my drug is in the market. I get to know a generic company which has put on its website going to launch this particular drug that is of mine. They're just putting up hoardings and advertisements. Based on that, I can file what we call this as a QR time-out suit. So I can file a suit and get an injunction against him on the premise that he has done everything else and he's about to launch an infringing product. So even that is permitted by the court, because I shouldn't be left to wait for the infringing product to come into the market and to disrupt the market before I can stop him. So if I'm vigilant, I can even stop him at that stage. Now coming to the Patents Act. Now we look at Patents Act in depth. Now, as you all know, the Patents Act was enacted in 1970. It was enacted to promote technological innovation, to transfer and disseminate technology, and it was enacted to establish a mutual advantage of both innovators and users. Now, as you all know, the Patents Act has what we call as a quid pro quo. So the inventor or the patent applicant gets a monopoly for 20 years, but in return to that, he or she is publishing the invention to the rest of the world to use, to work on, and to improve upon. So that is the quid pro quo that the Patents Act is premised on. And post TRIPS, which is the WTO Treaty on Intellectual Property Rights, post that in 2005, we became a product patent regime. So before that, we were not affording product patents. Post that, we're now affording product patents. Now you see the term national treatment. Now national treatment basically is, since we're all signatories to WTO, since most countries are signatories to the WTO and to the TRIPS therefore, we have to afford the same protection that we will afford to a citizen of India to an outsider as well. Now, there are certain circumstances, certain provisions under the Patents Act, like foreign filing licenses, which are applicable specifically to residents. But we won't look at that. Largely, all of the provisions that apply to Indians should apply equally, and we cannot discriminate with any other country or any other national. Now, coming on to the definition of invention, I'm sure most of you are aware of this. And under the Indian Patents Act, we can only have a patent for a product or a process. We don't have what we call as use claims, the Swiss claims as it is referred to in the EU and the UK. Now that they're separate, we have to address them separately. So invention has to be a product or a process. It has to be novel. It has to have an inventive step, and it has to be capable of industrial application. Now, each of these terms are defined separately. Of course, you would have gone through that in your previous lectures, so I won't touch upon that. Now, coming on to the major enforcement provision, which is Section 48. Now, Section 48 confers an exclusive right upon the patentee to prevent third parties from making, using, offering, selling, or importing the patent product or the product directly obtained by the patent process. Now, many call this a negative right, colloquially and popularly referred to as a negative right, because you're preventing third parties from. But essentially, it is that you have been conferred a monopoly over that product or process, and therefore you can prevent others. So it's not that, I wouldn't call it a negative right. It is very positive. You are getting a monopoly for 20 years to exploit an invention. And in return of that, you are giving the invention and that knowledge to the rest of the world. So again, like I said earlier, for the national treatment, Section 48 affords equal protection to all patentees, irrespective of their nationality. Now, this is not an unfettered right that a patentee has. These rights are subject to certain conditions, specifically Section 47, the government use. So if there is, the invention can be used by the government without permission, without license for certain specific uses. There are certain medical, public health related exceptions as well. And of course, the main exception being the purpose of experiment or research, including that of instruction of pupils. For instance, here we have many professors. If any of the professors wish to use a patented invention, they won't be sued for infringement, and they shouldn't be, rightly so, because they are imparting education and therefore they won't be sued. Of course, what constitutes experiment or research is still not litigated in our country. It's still subject to a lot of interpretation as to what constitutes experiment or research. We've had many queries from our clients when they say, we are just experimenting on the product. They're commercial entities. We're just experimenting on the product. Can we do it? Will we be sued by the patentee? So these are gray area matters, and we will have to look at it as the jurisprudence develops in these regards. Next, coming on to a very important exception is Section 107A, which is probably called as the Bolar exemption, of course, from a famous US case and by that name. Now, this is again an exception to infringement, so which is there in many other jurisdictions. So here is an exception where if a person is using a patented invention solely for the purpose of obtaining a regulatory approval in India or outside, then that person can use that patent, it can work it, and can export it and import it. Now, you will notice curiously that here the word export is missing from this provision. It only says making, constructing, using, selling, or importing. Now, this was a contention in one of a very famous Bayer case before the Bombay High Court, where, in fact, earlier before the Bombay High Court, then it also went to the Delhi High Court. The Delhi High Court finally settled this matter. The division bench of the Delhi High Court finally settled this matter, where they clearly said that even though export is not mentioned under the provision, it does fall within the purview of selling. Selling can be selling domestically and selling abroad, and therefore export was read into. Now, this is what we call as judicial interpretation of provisions. So even if a word is not there, the court has decided to interpret it and to include it in the provision, to look at the context and to look at the purpose. The purpose is to allow someone to use an invention when they're not using it for a commercial gain, but they're using it to obtain regulatory approvals. Now, why is this important? Is because you don't necessarily have to wait for 20 years to begin your research. 20 years of the monopoly term of the patent. You can do the necessary groundwork. You can get your drug regulatory approvals, as you know, which are extremely time consuming in India or abroad, in some other jurisdictions. So you can do that, and you can do the necessary groundwork for that, work the invention, export it, get the approvals. And then once the 20-year period is over, readily launch it in the market. So this is what is the 107A. Recently, there was a case where Merck, for its famous drug sitagliptin, its diabetic drug sitagliptin, sued a generic maker who was exporting large quantities, outside the country to China and to Cyprus and many other countries. So Merck sued them. Now, Merck said that the fact that they're exporting such large quantities means that they are doing commercial business and that they cannot avail this exemption. Now, the generic company said, we can give you in writing that we are only selling it, we are only exporting it to different entities for regulatory approvals. We are not gaining any commercial benefit out of it. So the court clearly said that your fear that they're doing it for commercial gains is unfounded. So what the court did was the court asked the generic to file an affidavit before the court that you're only selling these quantities to these entities, give the identity, disclose the identity of those entities in those countries, and sign a signed affidavit that you're only doing it for research and for regulatory approval purposes. Coming on to when can a patent infringement suit be filed. So a very important thing, you can file a patent infringement suit only post grant. So unlike trademarks where we said no registration needed, you can still file a suit, passing off suit. Here you have to wait for the grant of the patent only then, and only when a person, as we saw under Section 48, if he's selling the product that is claimed in your patent invention, or the process or the product which is a direct result of your claimed process. So in either of these two conditions, you can file a patent infringement suit. You cannot file a patent infringement suit before the grant. However, what is important to note is that you can claim damages in a patent infringement suit right from the day of publication. So although my publication date may be 2006, and I may have got the patent granted in 2021, and I may be only suing in 2021, I can still claim damages from 2006. So any activity from 2006, I can claim damages, but the suit only post grant. Now here there's a bit of a rider, is because we had a decision by the Honorable Supreme Court in Alois Woburn versus Yogesh Mehra, where the Supreme Court made an observation that since the Patents Act has a provision of post-grant opposition, whereby within 1 year from the grant of the patent, 1 year from the grant, from the date of publication of the grant of the patent, a post-grant opposition can be filed. So the Supreme Court, in what we call as an obiter. Now, a judgment usually has two aspects. One, an obiter, where the court lays down certain observation. And one is what we call as a ratio. A ratio decidendi is what we call as the final decision on merits or a final decision interpreting a provision of law. Now, this particular observation that the patent rights crystallizes only 1 year post the grant, that is, you can sue only 1 year post the grant, is an obiter, is an observation by the court. It was ruling and it was creating a lot of confusion among clients and lawyers as to how to go about it. So in one case, what had happened was Novartis sued NATCO. There was a post-grant proceeding. So NATCO had instituted a post-grant opposition proceeding against Novartis's drug patent, and the post-grant proceedings was going on. Nevertheless, even though the post-grant proceedings has not been completed, NATCO launched the infringing product. So here, Novartis sued NATCO, and the court said, I'm going to make an exception in this case because NATCO has consciously not waited for the post-grant. So if a plaintiff has to wait, as per the Supreme Court order, for the post-grant opposition to be completed for 1 year to ensure that the post-grant proceedings are completed or no post-grant proceedings have been filed in that 1 year and then file a suit, the same should apply to a defendant also. So here the court made an exception and said that the Supreme Court has not addressed this aspect. Therefore, they allowed the injunction and they said that no, NATCO cannot sell because the post-grant proceedings has not completed, and as on date, the patent is valid. Unless and until it's revoked, it is valid and therefore an injunction. However, unfortunately for Novartis, the patent later got revoked and therefore the injunction was also stayed. Now, the Supreme Court also, has many a time said that patent IP suits should be adjudicated on a more expedited basis because these are essential commercial reliefs. These can, bring the entire commercial entity to a standstill. One injunction order can stop someone's entire business in 1 day. So therefore, these need to be adjudicated more expeditiously. Of course, what the Supreme Court has said about 4 months is a very, very, very optimistic one, which we're not seeing, but definitely we are seeing things improve in the last 5 years, especially since the Commercial Courts Act, which I'll get into. Since the Commercial Courts Act enacted, we are seeing more expedited more expedited adjudication of IP infringement suits in our country. Now, I'll just briefly touch upon this. Now, we've already looked at it, similar to patents and designs, not less than a court of a district court and a counterclaim for invalidity. And now with the enactment of the Commercial Courts Act, all IPR disputes have been classified as commercial disputes. So we have a separate wing of civil disputes called as a commercial courts. And these commercial courts have been set up either at the district level as well as at the high court level, and then similarly the appellate division as well. Now here, what the Commercial Courts Act did is that it brought in some specific procedures for easier and speedy redressal of IP matters and for commercial matters in general. So for instance, they had what is called as a case management hearing. There will be time bound within 6 months, of arguments. The first case management hearing has to happen. There are specific time limits. Yeah, thank you. So there are specific time limits imposed for each stage of the trial. And then, time limits, even judges go on to say even specific time limits for lawyers to argue. In fact, even the Supreme Court has recently noted that lawyers' habits need to change and we shouldn't be talking for too long and arguing for too long. So now we see judges giving us very specific time limits even to argue a matter. And an important addition by this Commercial Court Act is the summary judgment. Now, a summary judgment is at any stage of the suit. Any party can file an application for summary judgment. Now, a summary judgment is without trial. The court can decide based on, now these are cases which are easily determinable for somebody, selling Tati, something like that. It can be adjudicated easily, summarily, without a trial. So that option is now given to the courts. They don't have to necessarily go to trial, even for a simple matter, which is very clear on facts and on matters and documents based on the record. They can, adjudicate it right away. Just to give you a sense, of how these timelines appear from the service, the first stage when the service of the plaint. So once I file the plaint, I have to serve it on the other side. Once that service happens, written statement is filed. Then we have what is inspection of documents, statement of admission and denial of documents. So at any stage, the summary proceeding can come at any stage. Case management hearing where the court sets down, this is the time limit for each stage. And then finally, the completion of trial, the arguments, cross-examination, examination of witnesses. And finally is the trial and the final decree. So now in a civil suit, the final adjudication is what we called as a decree. A final adjudication on the merits of the case is what we call as a decree. Now, similar reliefs for patent infringement, as we had seen earlier, damages, destruction of goods, account of profit, interim injunction, and as I mentioned, damages you can claim even from the date of publication of your application. Now, here you will see, here you will see the criteria for interim injunction in a patent infringement suit. One additional point here being public interest consideration. Now, this is especially more so in the case of pharmaceutical patents, where court will also look into public interest, specifically because of the cost of the drug that is being offered. Generics are able to offer it at, almost 1/3 or, a fraction of the cost of what the innovator is offering. And therefore, the court does take into consideration public interest as well. But it is not as if public interest is the only criteria, right? Additional criteria, all the top three, which is a prima facie case, balance of convenience, irreparable harm and injury, all of these will have to be considered. Next, very important in the case of a patent infringement suit is that interim injunctions can be prevented if you can show a credible challenge to the validity. Now, a credible challenge to the validity before trial is going to be an extremely challenging task. You have to show that the patent is invalid without a trial, where you're examining experts, you're leading evidence without cross-examination, examination of witnesses. You still have to convince the court that the patent is prima facie invalid, which is an extremely challenging task. And that is what ultimately most patent suits boil down to. And we'll see one of those suits today in the case study. So how do you establish that? How do you establish credible challenge to a validity? Now, here you don't have to convince the court that the patent is definitely invalid. You have to create a doubt that the patent seems to be. You have to create a doubt that it is vulnerable. All you have to show to the court is that it is vulnerable either because it's prior published, on novelty grounds, on inventive step, on Section 6, on Section 3, on Section 8, any of the grounds under Section 64 of the Patents Act. So here we have some rulings there. The court says that, and why is this provision is important is because there is no presumption of validity patent. Just because you have a granted patent, a patent has been examined by a controller and a patent has been granted, rigorous examination proceedings, an FER is issued, you respond, there's a hearing before the controller, there may have been a pre-grant opposition proceeding also that you have overcome. Therefore, it is not as if once a patent has been granted, it is immune to attack. It can be attacked at any stage. It can be attacked post-grant, it can be revoked separately, or it can be attacked even in an infringement suit. So therefore, there is no presumption of validity. And you have to show some basis before the court to show that the patent is vulnerable. And your challenge should not be vexatious. That is what the court will look at the interim stage before trial. The court will look at that you're not raising just for the sake of raising, all the grounds under Section 64 without showing any prior art, without showing any basis to show how a patent is vulnerable to attack. Now, with regard to timelines, now we on an average see that an average patent infringement suit before a high court takes anywhere between 5 to 7 years to attain completion, which is a long time. And we are seeing that time reduce more and more. We are seeing patent infringement suits being taken up, more expeditiously by the court. So this is changing. And hopefully with this IP division being created and with judges focused on IP law, this is going to obviously decrease further. And interim injunctions, like I said, is the most crucial thing in IP infringement suits, even in patent infringement suits, because these can be decided in the first few hearings, in the first few weeks, usually first few months in the cases of patents. Now, Indian courts are inclined not to give a restrictive interpretation to the language of claims. Now, what we called as a golden rule of statutory interpretation is to read the provision of the statute, as ordinary English, give meaning as the word appear on the statute. Now, similarly, even for claims, that's how the court interpret patent claims. They give ordinary meaning to the words of the claim. They don't necessarily look at the specification. They will only look at the specification when there is any ambiguity. Now, this was very clearly established by the division bench of the Delhi High Court in Roche versus Cipla, where they clearly said that you will have to interpret the claim language from the language of the claims. Ordinary English words, you interpret it based on that. If there is any ambiguity, we can look into the specification. So we interpret the claim language from the point of view of a person skilled in the art, what is the common general knowledge, understanding of a person skilled in the art, and how the inventor has framed the claims. Now, time is of essence. in interim injunctions, and Supreme Court, as I had already mentioned in the Bajaj case, had said that it should be expeditiously decided. There is a lot of talk that either Indian courts are pro-patentee or they're anti-patentee. Absolutely, there is no basis for this kind of bias at all by the Indian courts. Indian courts adjudicate matters on a case-to-case basis. We have examples. We have precedent both where Indian cases have granted interim injunctions and granted final injunctions. In fact, two of the famous patent matters, pharmaceutical patent matters, Roche versus Cipla, Merck versus Glenmark, both post-trial, both awarding in favor of the plaintiff. So it's not as if we are generic friendly or we are innovator friendly. Courts adjudicate each matter based on the merits of the case. And like I mentioned earlier, courts will not deny injunction only because of public interest. So merely because a generic says that I am offering the drug at 1/4 the cost of what the innovator is offering, therefore allow me, the court will not deny injunction in those cases. And what is important is, at least in patent matters, Indian courts have considered a wide range of foreign jurisprudence and foreign precedent, because as you all know, the concepts of novelty, inventive step, sufficiency, they're all common in all jurisdictions. They may be worded differently, but the essence or the crux is the same. The tests applied for all of these are also going to be the same. Therefore, Indian courts are very open to looking at foreign jurisprudence because obviously Indian jurisprudence is not of that quantity as we would like, and it is developing. So Indian courts are very open to looking at foreign jurisprudence. And like I said, the crucial point is there is no presumption of validity, and therefore it is very important to ensure that your patent is strong. There is no prior art going to hit on your patent before you enforce your patent. You should, when you're enforcing your patent, you should always be wary of the fact that it can be challenged on validity, and therefore you need to strengthen your validity grounds. This just to give you a sense of the amount of IPR cases. Of course, this is an old survey, but this gives, and this is only before the Delhi High Court here. It gives you a sense of about 1,500 cases. 58% of the cases are state now, and the average age of a state case is about 4.3, and here you can find about 7 years it takes for an IPR case to be disposed finally. So, I mean, these are all, as you know, 2017, 2018. So early stages of Commercial Courts Act, which came in 2015. So now things are going to be improved. We will see, much reduction in the timeline and the pendency rates in the coming future. And here you can see this chart shows you that most of the matters are stuck at the pleading stage. So, that is also the problem that we're facing before the courts, that a lot of matters, and post-COVID, of course, that has been a big burden because courts are not able to function, to their full maximum. And therefore, a lot of matters are stuck at the pleading stage. And we need to find a way to, and Commercial Courts Act was one of the ways to quicken or to hasten this pendency here. Yeah, this is just an explanation of what I had just shown you in the, this point is important. So something that the Supreme Court has come down very heavily and said that lengthy interim orders. Now, in the case of patents, we see just merely as there is a challenge to the validity of the patent, the court goes on to a very lengthy analysis of the patent. They're looking at prior art documents, they're considering, foreign prosecution and all of that. This increases the rate of pendency. So courts take a lot of time, and they sort of end up conducting a mini trial, which is not the requirement of an interim injunction. An interim injunction is basically on the matter, on a general balance of probabilities, what is the position that the court should take. So courts, some courts have had this tendency of going into a mini trial, conducting a mini trial, which has been condemned by the Supreme Court many a times. And therefore, I think now with the IP division being instituted, court generally, these judges will not try to overcompensate by going into too much detail at the interim stage. Just to give you a sense of the number of patent infringement cases between 2013 to 2020, before the Delhi and the Bombay High Courts, these preferred, of course, Madras is also there. These are the preferred jurisdictions for patent infringement suits. And these are the kind of numbers, that we have. Obviously, nowhere in comparison to the kind of numbers that other jurisdictions see, such as UK and the US and EU. But nevertheless, I think we are seeing an incline. Probably 2020 is probably a reduction owing to COVID. But there is a fair share of patent infringement suits being filed in our country. Now, finally, I will come to the case study that we're going to do. This is a case of AstraZeneca versus not just Intas, there were many other generics. So AstraZeneca has, I'll just give you a brief of the case and then we'll go into the specific aspects that were dealt with therein. So AstraZeneca is the owner of a patent for a drug, dapagliflozin. Now, this dapagliflozin is predominantly an anti-diabetic drug. Specifically, it's a CRL-glycoside, which is it inhibits the SGLT2 inhibitor in kidneys and in the intestine, and therefore, a treatment for diabetes. So they had two patents. Now, AstraZeneca filed a patent for a Marcus structure, which we call as a genus patent. Now, genus and species, I'll be referring to these two words, not in the context of, scientific names of, plants and animals that we have studied, not in that context, but what I call genus is a Marcus, is a broader set, and species is a smaller subset. So it is in this context that I'll be referring to the terms genus and species. So AstraZeneca first gets a patent in India for a broad Marcus. Now, a Marcus is basically, a formula, essentially a formula wherein you have different variables. So you get a formula, a broad Marcus patent. Of course, it's a product at the end of the day. It is a product, so you get a product patent, but a broad Marcus. And then they applied for a separate patent and got a separate patent for specifically the compound DAPA, which is dapagliflozin. I'll be calling it as DAPA. So one is a formula under which DAPA falls. So if you say, for instance, take 3-4 variables specifically, you'll get DAPA within that Marcus formula. So they got a genus patent and they got a species patent. Now, the genus patent expires in October 2020, and the species patent has further validity period. Now, what AstraZeneca does is that this is an extremely crucial, important blockbuster drug, and therefore these generic companies, many of the generic companies, about 7 or 8 generic companies, they launched they waited for the genus patent to expire. They waited for this Marcus patent to expire, and then they launched, or they were proposing to launch, or they had either launched the DAPA drug. Now, on this basis, AstraZeneca sued these generics under both patents. They sued them for infringement of both the genus patent as well as the species patent. Now, generally, when the facts are similar and the parties are in common, generally all matters are clubbed before one judge. Usually, this is what happened, of course, to waste judicial time. But here, curiously, for whatever reasons, administrative or otherwise, during the period of COVID, the matters were split between Justice Mukta Gupta and Justice Rajiv Shakdar of the Delhi High Court. It was split. So there were about 3 or 4 matters with Justice Mukta Gupta and 3 or 4 matters before Justice Shakdar. Some generics before one judge and the other generics before the other. And so both the single judges were adjudicating the same issue, and both came to the conclusion that interim injunction should not be granted because there is a credible challenge to the validity. So all the generics challenged the validity of the species patent. They challenged the validity of the species patent, saying that the species patent could never have been granted. It is being granted for the same drug which was for the genus patent. Therefore, the species patent could never have been granted. Of course, they used all the other grounds. They said it was not novel. It lacked inventive step. It couldn't have been granted under Section 8. There were Section 8 violations, as you all know, is a foreign filing provision. So under all of those provisions, they had challenged. And both these judges came to the same conclusion that there is a credible challenge. They denied interim injunction. However, the reasons were different. So Justice Mukta Gupta reasoned that the patent is invalid for lack of inventive step and Section 8, whereas Justice Shakdar said that it is invalid for prior claiming, it is invalid for lack of inventive step, it is invalid for Section 8 as well. So these were the differences, different reasons, but they both came to the same conclusion. Now, AstraZeneca appealed these matters before the division bench. And the division bench recently, in fact, on 20th July 2021, the division bench presided by Justice Endlaw came to the conclusion that the judgments were right. He upheld the judgment. So he upheld both judgments, and he said that injunction should be denied. So this is a very landmark order because this is for the first time that the courts are grappling with this issue of genus and species. So the question that we are going to analyze here: can you have the same compound being claimed under 2 different patents? If you can, what are the circumstances in which you can? If you can't, then that's the answer. So we'll be looking at that in depth. So just to give you a sense of the specific patent numbers. So here we have the genus, which was expired, and then you have the species, which was currently pending at the time of these suits. So the issue that we're dealing with is genus versus species. Now, coverage versus disclosure. So what was the argument of AstraZeneca was that the genus covers DAPA, which is the drug that the infringers are making. So DAPA is the drug which they have specifically claimed in the species patent. So the AstraZeneca's argument was that genus covers DAPA but does not disclose it. Therefore, the difference between the terms coverage and disclosure. Of course, this dispute stems from the landmark Supreme Court order in Novartis of 2013, whereby the court sort of left this question open. Can you have coverage yet not disclose? The Supreme Court sort of left that question open when they said that it is not desirable to have a big difference between what is coverage and disclosure. So the Supreme Court did not conclusively determine, whether there can be a circumstance when a patent covers a certain compound, when a patent claim covers a certain compound but does not disclose it. So here is the first time that the courts are grappling with this issue head on. So as I said, the stages of interim injunction. So the matter will now proceed to trial. Of course, now we hope that we expect that the matter will go up to the Supreme Court even at the stage of interim injunction. So you can see October 2020, the suit was filed. Now we are in about July 2021. It's still in the interim stage. It has not yet proceeded to trial. So this is why, in patent matters, things can get delayed and get complicated. So like I said, both single judges dismissed the application and the division bench upheld the order of the single judge. Just to give you a sense of the specifics of the genus patent. So both are glucoside aryl compounds. Here you have the genus, and here you have a specific compound, which is DAPA. Now you can see the priority date here, 1999 versus 2002. And you can see the date of expiry 2020, and here this is 2023. Now, first things we look at what Justice Shagdar said. Justice Shagdar firstly said that a challenge to a patent can be made at any stage. Now, this was an important ruling here, because prior to this, there have been many judgments which said that if a patent is very old, say it was granted, 17 years back or 16 years back, if a patent is very old, or if there has been no pre-grant or no post-grant against that patent, interim injunction should be given. There should be presumed validity. You should give credence, to what the patent office does, and they are examining a patent and they're granting it. So you have to give it some weightage. There were some precedents, but I think here Justice Shagdar shut the door on that. He said that nothing doing, there is no presumption of validity. Specifically, Section 13(4) of the Patents Act says that there is absolutely no presumption, and therefore you can challenge a patent at any stage. There should be no consideration of the fact that a patent is an old patent or a new patent. A patent has been put to pre-grant opposition or post-grant opposition. Those kind of considerations should not be taken. That is something that Justice Shagdar has held here. The second question, like I mentioned before, that you're not required to conclusively prove at an interim stage that a patent is invalid. You have to show that a patent is vulnerable and that your attack is not vexatious. Now here, the curious thing was that AstraZeneca sues for both the genus patent as well as the species patent infringement. So here, according to Justice Shagdar, it was a little bit perplexing for him that when you're saying that the patent claims covers DAPA, how can you say that DAPA is not disclosed? Now, the argument of AstraZeneca was, although the Marcus covers DAPA, I have not disclosed DAPA's compound or the chemical formula of DAPA in my specification. In my specification, I had disclosed about 80 compounds. Now, obviously, in a Marcus can have thousands and sometimes millions of compounds. I don't have to disclose all of them. I will exemplify only some. Sufficiency does not require you to exemplify all compounds in a particular claim. It only expects you to identify some of the embodiments in order to show the best working method, of course, of the patent. So their argument was that out of the 80, DAPA is not there in the specification. Therefore, I can have the Marcus in the genus claim and I can have specifically DAPA in the species claim. Therefore, I'm going to be suing the generics under both the patents. So that was the argument which Justice Shagdar was not convinced about. He said that you cannot have that. Importantly, Justice Shagdar brought to light Section 53(4) of the Patents Act, which is something that we've not yet seen brought into patent litigation until this case. Now, 53(4) is probably in his answer to a lack of a double patenting provision. Now, you will know from the Patents Act, there is no specific provision on double patenting. We have prior claiming, which is a very narrow subset of a novelty objection essentially, but we don't have a very specific double patenting provision under the Patents Act. 53(4) is being used, at least it was used in this case successfully by the generics, where they said if a patent has either expired or if a patent has lapsed, then that subject matter of the lapsed patent or the expired patent is not entitled to any further protection. This is the wordings of Section 53(4). So here the generics argued the fact that your genus patent has expired, DAPA being covered within that scope, you cannot have any further protection on DAPA post that by way of a species patent. Therefore, they said that the species patent is invalid and therefore there is no infringement. If it's invalid, then there is no case of infringement made out against the generics. Now, Justice Shagdar also held this patent to be prior claimed. So he went on the prior claiming ground, and he said on the prior claiming ground, it is prior claim because it is covered under both the claims, specifically in the genus and covered within the Marcos of the species and that of the genus. On the point of novelty, however, Justice Shagdar did not hold it to be vulnerable. He said that this is a matter of trial and it will need to be led, and therefore on this question he kept it open. He did not decide finally on the issue of novelty.
Please unmute yourself. Please mute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Atish. Then the next question on lack of inventive step. Now here, this is a very important determination by Justice Shagdar, is where he says that he compared the specification of the genus and that of the species. Now, AstraZeneca's argument was when the inventors invented the Marcos formula, there was no commercially viable drug that they came up with. There was no, they knew that this group of compounds had this inhibitor activity of SGLT2, that it could be used for diabetes, but they didn't have one commercially viable product. And that product came later on, only, you know, when they filed in 2002, when they filed the species patent. So that was the argument. So what Justice Shagdar did was he compared the specification. He showed that the specification was identical predominantly, that it was the same technical advance that they claimed in the genus and that what they're claiming in the species. So therefore, he went into the question as to what is the technical advance. As you all know, the test for inventive step, the inventive steps definition is that there has to be a technical advance or an economic significance when compared to the existing prior art knowledge, and that technical advance or economic significance should not be obvious to a person skilled in the art. So here, Justice Shagdar questioned as to what is your technical advance? Now, the answer to this by AstraZeneca was that they filed an affidavit in 2021, in 2020, when the matter was before the court, they filed an affidavit that today we know that DAPA does not only have this DAPA specific drug, does not only have antibiotic properties, it also has, say, properties of curing heart diseases. But then, so essentially a post-filing data. But here Justice Shagdar clearly said you cannot have post-filing data to support technical advance. You can have post-filing data to say enhanced efficacy under Section 3D, but not for inventive step. You have to show technical advance on the date of filing of the patent application. You can show some preliminary technical advance and confirm that later on by means of an affidavit or by means of a test report. Say, for instance, on the date of filing my application in the complete specification, I show that it could have heart disease properties, and I confirm it with further tests in 2020 in a dispute. That can be done, but you cannot for the first time establish technical advance by way of an affidavit before a court of law. So clearly there on that point, on the technical advance point, Justice Shagdar said species patent is invalid. Now, the next important question, as we all saw, was before we discussed was Section 8. Now, Section 8 here, what was important is the corresponding patent applications in the US to both the genus and the species, AstraZeneca had made a terminal disclaimer. Now, what is a terminal disclaimer under US provisions? In order to overcome an objection of double patenting, a patent applicant can say that I will limit the validity of my species patent to that of the genus patent. So essentially, this is what AstraZeneca did in the US. They said, I have two genus and species. There was a objection of double patenting. In order to overcome that, AstraZeneca said, I will limit my term of my species to that of the genus. So essentially, both the genus and species will expire at the same time. Therefore, there is no question of having an extended period of monopoly for the same compound. This fact, wherein that they had claimed this terminal disclaimer in US, was not brought to attention of the Indian Patent Office, and therefore there is a Section 8 violation. Now, as you all know, Section 8, it is not a mere error that is held as a Section 8 violation. There has to be a willful and deliberate omission, and this, the defendants, the generics, argued that this was a willful suppression, and Justice Shagdar agreed. Now, therefore, looking at all of this, and as you will see, Justice Shagdar also looked at the public interest. So it was not as if public interest is the main, that was an additional feature here, the difference of the drug between 250 to 300%, and therefore was also considered. And so in facing all of these circumstances, Justice Shagdar came to the conclusion that there is a credible challenge, and therefore the patent, the species patent is liable to be rendered invalid, and therefore no interim injunction against the defendants. However, so the last point that you see, to file affidavits. This is to ensure, equity. This is on equity that the courts do, that tomorrow, on trial, the judge may come to a different conclusion. Therefore, to ensure that, there is proper maintenance of accounts, generally the courts ask the defendants to submit affidavits of their sales so that it's easier at the stage of trial in case the decision needs to be reversed, in case it's found that AstraZeneca, is winning the case, then therefore it will be easier to calculate the damages. So they were asked to file affidavits for their sales of the drug for every quarter before the court. Now, coming to Justice Mukta Gupta's judgment. Justice Mukta Gupta's judgment, like I said, differed on many points with Justice Shagdar's judgment, but of course, the final conclusion being the same. On the point of disclosure, Justice Mukta Gupta takes a contrary stand. She says, she interprets, in fact, Novartis Supreme Court order, and she says that there is a difference between disclosure and coverage, that since DAPA was not specifically disclosed in the genus patent, and in fact, DAPA was not even invented at the time. That was the reasoning there. That was not even invented. At the time they had known the Marcos, it was only later on at the species patent that they came up with the specific molecule, with the specific compound DAPA. Since there is no specific disclosure, the genus patent is distinct, the species patent is distinct, and therefore it can survive, both can survive together. That was her stand, and therefore she said that there is no prior claiming. She refused the grounds on lack of novelty. But coming on to inventive step. Now, an inventive step, Justice Mukta Gupta holds that the patent is vulnerable for attack. Why? Because out of the, I mentioned that there are 80 compounds in the genus that they had exemplified. They had not exemplified DAPA, but 80 other compounds. In that one particular example number 12, is very close to DAPA. In fact, it's almost identical, except for an ethoxy group. So an ethoxy group is what it is in the case of a DAPA, but it was a methoxy group in the case of the example number 12 under the genus patent. So, in an inventive step analysis, you take the closest prior art and you see, is it possible for a person skilled in the art, with the knowledge, the common general knowledge and the disclosure in the prior art to arrive at the claimed compound. So when analyzing in this, now you're seeing a very in-depth analysis, which is something that should not be gone into, in my personal opinion, at an interim stage, of course, but here Justice Mukta Gupta ventures into that. So she says that example 12, when you compare it with DAPA, there is only a change of ethoxy to from methoxy to ethoxy, and therefore both being lower alkyls is obvious to a person skilled in the art. So here Justice Mukta Gupta says that there is nothing in the prior art to suggest that a person skilled in the art will not replace, that this is something that they will commonly do. They will replace ethoxy, methoxy, and therefore this is obvious to a person skilled in the art, and therefore she holds the species patent to be vulnerable to attack on the basis of lack of inventive step. Then on the point of the terminal disclosure on Section 8, again, Justice Mukta Gupta is also of the view that there was a Section 8 violation, and that the fact that it was not brought to the attention of the patent office during prosecution was fatal, and therefore the species patent is vulnerable for non-compliance of Section 8. Here, okay, this point of clearing the way. Now, this is again a judicially created concept where courts have held that the defendants, the generics who are going to work a patent, they need to clear the way. So they need to file a revocation or a post-grant opposition to ensure that, the patent, they've cleared the way and they've gotten, they have exhausted all opportunities before, launching the drug. So that is an observation that was done, and that, in fact, Justice Mukta Gupta carries on. But like I said earlier, Justice Shagdar has said that there is no such requirement, there is no such statutory requirement for a defendant or a generic company to have filed an opposition before launching, a drug which is a part of a patented invention. So on the basis of ground of obviousness and on Section 8, Justice Mukta Gupta comes to the conclusion that no interim injunction. So the conclusion is same, the reasoning's a little bit different. Now coming on to what the division bench. So as I mentioned, these are both single judges. They were sitting separately. Now the appeal from a single judge goes to a bench of 2 judges before the same High Court. Now from this judgment, AstraZeneca can choose to appeal to the Supreme Court directly. That's how the judicial hierarchy is in India. So here, Justice Endlaw, who is writing the judgment, he says that his major premise was that there cannot be 2 patents for the same invention. Essentially, DAPA being claimed both in the genus as well as in the species cannot be possible according to Justice Endlaw, and that strikes at the very root of the Patents Act. And here, most importantly, Justice Endlaw reasons that it is the same group of inventors. It is the same inventors who invented the genus as well as who invented the species patent. And therefore, he says that the assessment in such a scenario where the inventors are the same is not going to be your average person skilled in the art. Your average considerations or your normal considerations that you would have for any other patent cannot be the same here. And here he says it has to be a person in the know. So here he was, Justice Endlaw commented that it is possible that AstraZeneca already was aware of DAPA when they made the genus. But in order to have a prolonged period of monopoly, they choose to file a separate species patent without any technical advance. Now, one thing that I have to say here, but one thing I have to point out here is that it's not as if genus species patent cannot exist. That almost all jurisdictions, all major jurisdictions, UK, EU, US, all affords genus and species patent. It is possible. But what is important is that you need to show a technical advance in the species. You need to show that there is something different. For instance, to give you an example, if a genus patent is for an anti-diabetic drug, you say that the compounds in this particular Marcos all have anti-diabetic properties, all have properties of inhibiting some specific inhibitor for anti-diabetic properties. But you found through further research that one particular compound in that Marcos also suddenly starts treating AIDS. Now, this is a specific technical advance you're showing, and therefore you're showing a distinct invention, and therefore you are liable. So these are the kind, again, India has not come into any judicial determination on this aspect, but world over in other jurisdictions, these are cases in which genus and species exist. But here in this case, this technical advance, which is a very crucial point that Justice Shakhter pointed out in his judgment, was not identified. It's being identified in 2021, not in the specification when it was filed. Therefore, it gives rise to a lot of questions as to why did the inventors choose to file two different patents. In fact, in this judgment, Justice Endlaw goes on to question AstraZeneca as to why are you enforcing both patents? Why are you not enforcing only a species patent? Because they know that the species patent cannot stand on their own legs, because the species patent is rendered obvious, is rendered prior claimed, and so on and so forth. Therefore, the need to enforce both the patents in order to get a relief. And Justice Endlaw also questions all of these motives, that it could be possible that the inventors knew of DAPA when they were filing the genus, and just to get an extended period, they file a genus, the species patent as well. So these are the kind of questions that Justice Endlaw raised in his order. Now, here what he's trying to say is a more practical point. What he's trying to say is, you are suing the generics for making DAPA, which is the only drug that they're making is DAPA. They are not making any of the other compounds under the genus. They are making only DAPA. Now, if they are infringing your genus, that means DAPA has to have been disclosed. The fact that you're enforcing a patent against an infringer is the fact that it is disclosed. It could be that it is covered for the purposes of infringement, but not disclosed for the purposes of validity. So you can't have two different. So what Justice Endlaw tried to point out is, you're trying to take contradictory stance. You're trying to say, for the purposes of infringement, it is part of my claim. But when it is being questioned on validity, you're saying, no, it's not disclosed. Only the 80 compounds are disclosed. DAPA is not disclosed. So a sort of hot and cold, stand that AstraZeneca was taking. Now, again, 53(4), like I mentioned earlier, was one of the provisions that was discussed in this judgment. And Justice Endlaw says that the subject matter of the invention, if it has expired in one patent, it cannot be continued on to the other. And one of the most important considerations that Justice Endlaw looks into this is this terminal disclosure. So if you have a stand whereby before the US prosecution, before the US patent prosecution authorities, you have taken a stand that the genus and the species will be subject to the same validity period, you cannot take a contrary stand before India. You have to stick to the same stand. What is the basis? They were not able to explain during the course of the arguments, either before the single judge or before the division bench. They were not able to explain as to why they're claiming different validity periods in India. So again, double patenting is not a statutory provided provision even in the US. It is a non-statutory double patenting objection that the US prosecution takes. Even there, it was, if they have disclaimed that validity there, they are trying to extend the validity here. And therefore, on these points, Justice Endlaw holds that the single judge orders ought to be maintained, the interim injunction ought to be denied, and that is why he has upheld the orders of the single judge. So with that, I complete my presentation, and I'm open to any further questions.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Actually, we used to discuss this genus claims and specific species claims in our classes. So maybe the students must be benefited now. So the participants, you can ask questions now. Either you can post it in the chat box or directly ask to the speaker. I think there is one question in the chat box.
Okay.
I don't know what. How to sensitize common person on such IPR issues seems difficult in a country like India.
This is the way that we are doing it. I mean, it starts from here. So, with these kind of lectures and seminars that we're having, you can take it forward now and, in your university, and tomorrow when you head an organization, all of you become inventors or, become, come to managerial positions, you'll have to sensitize. It is going to take some time in our country, but the government is taking a lot of initiatives, to do this and to sensitize people of IPR protection. And most importantly is to, for instance, even IUC IPR initiatives to undertake filings and to promote, to reduce costs, for instance, in the filing procedure. All of these initiatives will help in sensitizing. So it's an evolving thing. We will get there. We will get there where even small businesses, for instance, how under the Patents Act, you have different fee structure for startups. So those kind of initiatives will help, people getting sensitized of IP rights. I believe there's one question on trademark. Suppose I have a trademark and using that for last 5 years, but not registered it. Now someone has copied and registered it and started using my trademark. Yes, very valid question. So you can do two things. One is you can sue this person directly for passing off, even though you don't have a registered trademark. And simultaneously, you can get this person's trademark removed. So that is what I mentioned earlier, which is a rectification proceedings before the trademark registry, and now of course before the High Court itself. So you can do that, and you can show the basis for that proceeding will be that you are the prior user, you were using it before this person, and you can get it removed and revoked. Not a problem. How to prove? Yes, you will have to show prior use. So you'll have to show invoices, you'll have to show advertisements, you'll have to show your any sort of invoice to suggest that you have been in the business, prior to him. So invoices, advertisements, all kinds of evidentiary documents that you can show to prove date of use. Yeah. And any other questions? I think that's about it on the chat box.
Yeah, participants, any concerns? So we have 10 minutes more, so we can discuss. Yeah, I hope there is no further questions. So I think we can move on to the vote of thanks session. Darshana?
Yes, ma'am. Now I invite Sweta Bhubesh, second semester LLM IPR PhD, to deliver the vote of thanks. Sweta?
Am I audible?
Yes, Sweta.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shweta, and I'm here to present the vote of thanks for today's online webinar first session. I would like to thank our resource person, Vindhya ma'am, for enlightening us with her knowledge. It gave a deep insight into the knowledge of framework of IP enforcement in India. The point where resource person told about the strategies to be adopted while monitoring infringement after the grant of IP, and when to file a patent infringement and how to file an infringement patent suit, and many case laws are really informative. I'm sure the precious knowledge ma'am gave us will definitely help us in our future life. Once again, I thank you, Vidya ma'am, for taking out the time from her busy schedule and enlightening us with the knowledge. Thank you. And I would also like to thank IUC IPRS and HL Academy for conducting this online workshop and the coordinators of this workshop. And also thank you to all the participants present here for paying attention to this session. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. So I think today there is an exam in the afternoon, so that's why the participants are elected to ask the questions. They are busy with preparing for the exam, I think so.
Okay, all the very best to everyone, and thank you, Dr. Asha, thank you, Dr. Atish, for facilitating this, and special thanks to Srinivasan sir for suggesting my name, and thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, India. No issues.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.